All right. Hello, everybody, ladies and gentlemen, my fellow anti-netters and friends. It has been, uh, I think, a few weeks since I've been uploading videos regularly. Usually I do a video once a week. And so with this video, we're going to, awaken the silence with a big bang. And on the screen, you will find the man, the myth, the legend of PKM and the Linking Your Thinking School of Knowledge Management, Mr. Nick Milo. So, hey, thanks for joining us, Nick, and it's great. Thank you for hopping on this call.
Thanks for having me, Scott. I'm really looking forward to it, nerding out on knowledge, and I think we'll cover a lot of great ground together.
Yeah, and I think I realized I called it a call, but I guess our video interview and our just exploration together. Um, so yeah, thank you. And to give some context, I reached out to you because I know the Linking Your Thinking cohort is live right now, and so you're getting ready to gear up for your upcoming launch and this new class here. And a lot of my audience, and I've told my story before to my people and my discovery, my whole origin story, like the hero's journey of me discovering Niklas Luhmann's analog, Zettelkasten, and with myself, I went through the process of just going deep, way deeper than I think most sane people go, which is I decided to, go to the digital archive of Niklas Luhmann, and they've digitized it, and I've translated his cards and then into English, and then I wrote it out by hand myself to kind of reproduce how his system worked in
Mm.
order to to learn how this whole thing really worked. And before I got to that step, I was introduced to a book called How to Take Smart Notes by Sankey Arens. And how I was introduced to that book was actually through you. And
Oh.
I think a lot of people I've told is, my story into this whole world. It started with actually discovering Foam, which was a an open source version of Rome, and then I discovered Obsidian, and then I
Mm.
discovered you and your great videos on YouTube, teaching Obsidian. And so you're part of my origin story. And so a lot of my people, they're like, wait, you're having like Nick on here? Like he's, into Obsidian and he's digital. And my people are like, very much into the analog way and doing it old school.
Yeah.
But I thought I would reach out to you because I think what you're doing is freaking awesome. You're growing this whole space, which is, PKM, knowledge management. You're making more and more people aware of it. you know, my position in this marketplace is, I obviously I love analog tools. I love analog knowledge development. And I think like maybe a year and a half ago, it was like 99% digital. And I think, my goal would be to get it to be like, well, 96% digital. And there's a 4% niche of the people that want to do it the old way, the slow way, the analog way.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I kind of wanted to offer that up as a context background so that when this video goes live, my people are like, "Hey, what the hell? Like, Nick is like Mr. Obsidian, Mr. Digital. Why are you having him on here?" And the reason is that I think a lot of the I've taken linking your thinking, and a lot of the principles that you introduce, you've said it ahead of time, is hey, this isn't just like necessarily for people that want to use Obsidian. You can use, any tool of choice, even analog. So, maybe
Yeah.
we can get into that on this call as well. So, anyway, that is the background context. That is why Nick is on here. And yeah, so thank you again for joining, Nick. And yeah, that's what I
For
wanted to
sure.
say.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you did. And just so I fit in, I did just hustle to grab my one analog box of notes here. So it's nothing
Yeah,
special.
yeah.
I'm not an anti-net practitioner, but
Uh-huh.
I do love the physical, the analog, and I don't think it should go away. So I'm not one of those diehard. We have to go digital types. I think really what we want to do, and we can continue to explore during this conversation, is that what is what is how is the health of our extended thinking environments? Like, how is that health? What is that health? Do we even have one? I know for you and I, we're aware that we this is an important thing, and for the people listening, most likely too. But the majority of the population isn't quite aware that there might be value, or even if they have an inkling, they don't have the necessary tools or knowledge to recognize that you can create this space where
Hmm.
you can do really meaningful thinking, whatever that looks like. So yeah, but that's it. Doesn't matter if it's analog or digital. I think at the core, it's like trying to find this space where we can do some of our best thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, what I kind of contend or advocate for is a lot of people, you know, and you've probably experienced this as well, where a lot of people they ask questions for the sake of they want to avoid mistakes.
Mm.
And I think, or, you know, and mistakes equals learning, you know, mistakes equals, you know, failure equals growth, you know, or failure equals feedback, feedback equals growth, growth equals, you know, mastery, right? And a lot of people, where I'm going with this is a lot of people with, and maybe you find this in digital too, is they are scared of analog. They feel like they have to choose one or the other, analog or digital. And
Mm.
my whole point is hey, you should test both. Why don't you test analog? Why don't you try to reverse engineer, you know, like the linking based analog version of note cards, you know, like kind of like the which is essentially what Luhmann introduced, the ability to kind of link individual thoughts. And then once you kind of get the workflow down, you know, why don't you then, you know, try digital? Or you can try, you know, of course, most people have already tried digital. Why don't you take a vacation, digital vacation, and try analog for a week and then go back to digital? You know, it's like I think the overall ecosystem of understanding both mediums and how they shape thought is good for a lot of people to explore. So yeah. Um,
Yeah. Just to add on quickly, it's I think taking if we can take stock of our entire as best we can our entire the main areas where we are doing our thinking, and just think about how we can improve what that feels like. Like over here, it won't focus, but yeah, like, see, I have this too. I do my obsidian stuff, and yet I have a little 2x2 here trying to figure out something. Actually, oh, this is funny. I just happened to be on this page, but here's me messing around with a digital analog note card style. I have something here called the NOMA method and then the 5 decade rule. And I'm trying
mhm,
to go through a few prompts to
interesting.
basically take a digital note making concept, but then just take it back into an analog form. What would that
Hmm.
look like? Where we could on the fly do that. But so I think as far as a permission that I try to give myself is it's okay. Like you don't have to be one or the other, and you can in fact, you're just going to do best to switch it up sometimes. Now we can talk about single source of truth and how important it is to have the place you go, but being able to kind of break free of a certain thinking energy,
Hmm.
like you can get a little stagnant sitting around, whatever. Maybe go walk around, just talk to somebody. That's part
Hmm.
of our thinking environment. Then when we come back to our core space, in this case, like the anti-net or something in the digital form, then we can kind of take it further. But it's part of the same system in a
Hmm.
large way.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And uh, also, let me check in with you too. How's the video on your end? Am I like coming through clear? Is it a little delayed? Is all good?
There is no delay, and it's looking pretty good from my
Okay,
end. Yeah.
cool, cool. Just wanted to check in. And Nick and I are using a sexy new tool called Riverside.fm, and I have no basis for calling it a sexy new tool. It could have been around for 10 years. I don't know, but it seems pretty cool.
It's new to us. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So let's jump in real quick to those that box of note cards there. I
Yeah, sure.
remember when you and I did our linking your thinking, the one-on-one sessions.
Yeah.
You mentioned that, and you still keep them around. And so, what's the origins of those notes? And were they notes that you took from readings? Were they kind of were they just basically where you kind of reformulated the thoughts of the books that you read, or what kind of where did they arise from?
Yeah. So something really important at the time. So I was working. At the time, let's see, I was on a TV show working in the post production office in the
Hmm.
bullpen. So there's a lot of back and forth traffic. It's just a term for I'd greet people, but I'd also be coordinating calls on the phone. Again, when I jumped into Los Angeles to jump into the entertainment industry proper, you start at the bottom up.
Hmm.
So
Yep.
this was just after I was done getting people lunches and coffees, and now
Hmm.
I'm more at a desk, but I still have to move around and handle a lot of things. And so then I thought, well, I want to still get thinking done. Like thinking
Hmm.
happens at random times, and yeah, that means it happens on the clock. So how can I capture something, or if I'm taking a break and I'm reading that random article like we all do, just because it's what happens, and we're
Hmm.
on the internet, how can I capture something really cool? So I didn't want to be on my phone. I didn't want to open up an app. Like I thought it'd be kind of almost discreet in a way to be able
Hmm.
to just throw it onto an index card. So this is one that still means a lot to me. It's the essayification of everything, and it's a New York Times article talking about the history of the term essay, tracking it back to Montaigne, if I'm saying that
Hmm.
correctly. How it means in French it means attempt,
Mm.
and they are notoriously non-committal. So I have my own
Okay.
thoughts, and there are a couple arrows and things, and then a couple extra thoughts on the back.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I've noticed this. You might have noticed this as well. I feel like the term essay has kind of had a renaissance, a resurgence, almost. Where people are like writing long form essays, and it's like almost like a I don't know more attractive idea writing an essay than it is to write a blog post or like an article or something. And I looked into this term at one point. I remember I was like, what is that? Because I don't like calling it like a blog post if I'm going to write. It's just something about it. And I was like, well, what is this? Is this a writing piece? But I'm like, well, essay is kind of a it's a term that has gained momentum, and I like that idea of it just being an attempt. Like, and is this essentially is what you're saying an attempt to get your thoughts, on paper and published to the world? Is that the kind of the the essence of this idea?
I think, yeah, the essence, an attempt to explore, and most traditionally in a non-committal sort of way.
Okay,
I'll be the first to say that most of my writings, and I think online writings in general, are more committal, more declarative, more here is the answer for you.
gotcha.
And maybe that's just a statement to the times that we live in. So
Hmm.
I'd say it's definitely an attempt to explore, and then with various degrees of um, commitment or statements or declarations.
Hmm. So it's more like an invitation to like request comments, feedback, and reflection from like the reader, on this idea that one is posing essentially in the piece. That's kind of what you mean by non-committal? Like you're not creating like a thesis and declaring a point and trying to inspire someone to adopt your viewpoint. You're saying it's almost like you're getting out on paper or on the essay. Here's something that I've been toiling over in my mind, and here is essentially an invitation, documentation of my thinking, and something that could maybe help you, like something like that.
Yeah, I'd say that's the essence. And again, there's a blurry area between how much will be prescriptive at the end and say,
Hmm.
you should do these things. Because I've a lot of writings that I would consider an essay because I've explored it, I've wandered around the terrain. It's been a joyful journey, but at the
Hmm.
end, I want to suggest something that is fairly prescriptive, fairly prescriptive that has some prescription to it. Like if you just do these things, or if you just start using this prompt, that reminds me, that might help out the dragging us from a lean back mode of being to one that's leaned forward and engaged with the ideas that we encounter. But yeah, at its heart, I think what we're saying is kind of there. We explore and we share.
Yeah, interesting. So, and this kind of came around, I've told you in our brief email exchange beforehand, it was like, I made sure to do my homework, come with some research to figure out, what people already know about you, your background story, and I kind of want to go, deeper into that as well, or touch on things that other people haven't, touched on or aren't aware of. And kind of what I've found, you know, from watching your YouTube videos and stuff like that, is there's not, at least on YouTube, there's not like a who is Nick Milo? Like who, what's his origin story? Who is this guy? I actually found like a lot of good information on you from listening to, like, I instead listened to some podcasts about you, and you were
Mm.
on several podcasts where you detailed your whole background. And I think one of the things that you just touched on is that these analog notes came during a time where, so in like 2016 you made the switch from like quite a drastic switch from, like, I think the civil engineer type of career, right, in 2016 to um, entering Hollywood as an older productive production assistant, like, where you said, like, I remember you saying in one interview that, being a PA and getting coffee and being a gopher, is like work that is beneath even like the 22-year-olds that are usually hired and become production assistants. But there you are in your late 20s, after you've had several ventures and careers at that point. You were like a
Mhm.
college football coach. You're also a great college athlete, in Montana, right? And you started that pink glove boxing gym, and had a career as a civil engineer, and then you go and take this big, almost seemingly big leap into Hollywood. And so, at the time that you took these analog notes, essentially, it was at the point where, okay, you earned, basically you kind of like started climbing the ladder, right? And you stopped doing the PA work. Is that right? And is that where you found yourself?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Just a little bit of clarity with the path is my undergraduate was civil engineering, and so right out of college, I immediately was doing that on top of also trying to coach at my alma mater, where I still had
Hmm.
plenty of friends, and it was just a great experience there. And I recognized that there was something missing in that civil engineering world. As much as I liked the critical problem solving and the designing and the developing, um, it just there was something that was missing. And I'm lucky enough that I guess I had the privilege to take a risk, and so I ended up quitting that without knowing exactly where I was going to make money. Um,
Oh, interesting.
I didn't just quit though. There was
Hmm.
that effort with Pink Gloves Boxing.
Hmm.
So a friend, a teammate, college teammate, and I, we decided to take this fitness boxing business that he had started with a few, like with his mom and a few of her friends, and then very quickly I came on board, and they were like, there was one little location where people were doing this, and then we said, hey, let's make this a business. We were so into
Hmm.
fitness, into health, holistically, not just get physically stronger or something, but hey, let's become mentally stronger. Let's become sharper with our communication and leadership skills, and actually make this all into one thing. And no one's done that with fitness boxing. So if you think about any other martial art, there's a belt system, but
Hmm.
not with boxing.
Hmm.
There's no belt system because of
Hmm.
various reasons. Usually, someone who was a boxer in a low income area becomes, the Mickey from like Rocky or something, and then that's all they know. So now they're teaching boxing, but there's no lineage. So we just wanted to create not the most hardcore system, but still something that is pretty impressive. So when someone goes from not being able to throw a single punch 4 years later, and that's how long the curriculum was. We had
Hmm.
essentially seven different tiers with that,
Mm.
you know,
It's fascinating.
and this was in universities and still is, but the pandemic hurt it largely.
Hmm.
But you take a first year student, and then by the time they're a senior, they've learned all sorts of skills, and now they're throwing all sorts of combinations you wouldn't believe, and it just looks amazing. Um, yeah.
So it's kind of like, it's a brilliant marketing and business, I guess, process or method. It's kind of like what one would call like an ascension ladder. Essentially, is what you're
Mm-hmm.
saying. Is It's kind of like what they do in karate with white belts.
Exactly.
brown belts, black belts. So you applied that model essentially to boxing, right? And then you had like 7 stages.
Hmm. Yeah, that's what we did, and it's been great. I just love what we did so much with that. There are a lot of external factors, some economic, some otherwise, that prevented pink gloves boxing from being this massive, massive thing, even though it's
Hmm.
still impacting the people in a massive way who take it. But
Yeah,
some of the skills and everything that were learned from that process have translated into other things. And that business, so we started that in 2009, and it's still running, which for any small business
that's
is
incredible.
pretty wild. But
Yeah.
so as that was happening, got into a couple indie feature films in Montana,
Hmm.
um, moved to New York, was continuing to do the pink gloves thing,
Hmm.
a lot of other tracks and everything. But yes, then eventually into Los Angeles at a desk, done getting people coffee, and
Hmm.
finally with enough space again where I wanted to, figure out stuff with knowledge
Hmm.
in a way where I could do that like at a desk easily.
Now, before we move back to the desk and back to Hollywood, everyone is obsessed with your whole work as a an assistant editor on Better Call Saul. Like that's what like I found like 99% of people just like cling to because it's such a captivating show.
Oh
Um,
man, wow.
before we, we'll touch on that, but before we do, you talked about the feature films and stuff in, I think were you in Montana at the time that you did some feature films?
Hmm.
Um, so I checked out your IMDb, and you go by Nick Milo, but your name it's a little bit longer and harder to
Do you want to
pronounce.
try?
Uh, okay, wait, let's see if I have the bio here.
If
Okay.
you don't have it handy,
I don't have it. I think I try to spell it real quick before, but it's like Milo Vogic, Milo Vogic,
Milo Dragovich.
Milo Dragovic. I
Yeah,
missed the Dragovic. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Um, it's interesting too. Is I looked into the IMDb, which is a great has a great bio on you, and
Hmm.
I saw I was like scrolling through there, and I see Nick Milo, actor and producer of the film Crimson Winter, and so I go to YouTube to search Crimson Winter, and it's funny. It's like seeing you. For people that want to see Nick Milo not on the screen of Obsidian doing Linking Your Thinking. It was like
Yeah.
mind blowing to see you as an actor. Like you were in like it was kind of like a vampire movie, and it
Uh
was
huh.
like, oh my God, that's Nick Milo right there. It was yeah, it was really interesting. I wonder, are there a lot of people like from the Linking Your Thinking space that have ever seen that or know about that? Have you ever, has anyone ever said, hey, look, Nick, this is you from like and
You know,
posted that trailer?
no, surprisingly no. Like, and I'm
Yeah.
totally good with all that. And again, like even like Milo Dragovich, that whole. I was like, well, now that that's sort of what I am in the entertainment industry. That's my full name. Very proud of it.
Yeah.
But it was psychologically a little helpful just to go back to Milo.
Yeah. I
And
like
growing
Nick
up,
Milo. It's a short name. It's like memorable. It's like you can't go back now because everyone knows you as Nick
yeah,
Milo in the PKM space.
yeah. And when I was doing both, it was nice to have the separation because, working on different shows, you don't want to. It's very important that everyone knows you're all in. And if you start to have too many outside interests, then it
Absolutely.
affects their perception. And it won't be an
Hmm.
obvious thing, but it really does. It's like, should we call? Will this person be committed to the next show? And for anyone in the industry who I've worked with, they will, the thing that they will never say is that I was never committed. I was always first there and last to leave. Um, and hard work is probably going to be on my tombstone. I'm not saying this is a good thing. It's just reality.
Hmm.
I'm not saying it's a good thing, but I really love the shows that I was able to work on. I was working on one with, yeah. So we can go back to that, but yeah. So Crimson Winter, super proud of that film. It's not going to, it's not winning any Oscars or anything, but
There was one great YouTube comment on the video. They're like, "I love this movie." I don't know. You should go check the trailer out. So you're collecting a underground fan base, even though if you don't know about it.
yeah, it was a labor of love, and what's nice about it is it's good enough that it gets compared to regular movies.
Hmm.
But you know, the thing is, none of us there had made a movie before,
Yeah.
so it's like if you're talking about, and it was a time where it was a little bit harder to get access to footage and everything. We filmed that one on the first Red camera, but
That's
it
what I
was
was gonna
still
say. The footage, it looks like a real movie. Looks like a big, yeah, probably because the red camera. Like it looks
yeah.
legit.
But yeah, it was, you know, people watching this aren't here for that, but it was certainly an interesting endeavor. One I'm super grateful that happened. And then we played it back one more time, and we did another film where I have a shaved head and I play in basically an asshole in a small town. Uh, com-
Okay.
Complete different performance. That one was kind of, the one that you saw as like the everyman sort of regular Joe, but
Hmm.
this one was a complete 180, which is why I
Hmm.
was excited to do it. Um, but yeah,
Yeah. And so you had some, you were a civil engineer, but you had some experience and a taste of, like the film, space and industry. And then, you decided to, when you went to essentially, Hollywood, um, yeah, that was like, essentially with that is, did you, like, how was that transition from civil engineer? You said you quit, or what was that transition like into, 2016 when you decided to go out to Hollywood?
yeah, totally. So I was still in Montana doing these when I ended civil engineering, and that was basically just over 1 year. Started the fitness boxing, started these two feature films, all in Montana, and
Okay.
then 2013 moved over to New York City, and then spent 3 years there, and that was great and everything. My girlfriend got a job. She's much more accomplished than I am by a long shot in the entertainment industry. Had an
Hmm.
opportunity to teach at UCLA, and I thought, hey, I've had a really good time in New York, but I do think I would enjoy Los Angeles
Hmm.
at the time, and that turned out to be a good move. I still miss aspects of New York, but it is so nice to have a little bit more space for someone who grew up in the mountains. Just a little bit more space to think and some quiet. Um, so yeah, came out here and started from the bottom up. Got on a post production show, getting people coffee.
Yeah. And and I know part of your origin story is you were using Evernote a lot. Were you using Evernote at that time, like to
Yes.
manage all of this stuff? And okay, so that's when you used Evernote, and yeah.
Before I switched while I was still in New York, 2015,
Hmm.
and yeah, I mean, remember vividly because it had failed me, and I was wandering around aimlessly in Central Park, looking at a squirrel in particular chasing its tail, and thinking, "Man, that squirrel is less lost than I am right now." I mean, that is
Hmm.
how I felt. Like I was so lost because just digitally, I had all this noise. And that's why I was walking around in this giant park because I was trying to like get a sense of myself again,
Hmm.
and feeling like my digital tool had failed me, and how vulnerable I guess I felt, not
Hmm.
having a sense of grounding. So that's when I went plain text and was starting to use those very um, Luddite. What am I trying to say? What's the right word? Anyways, very plain tools like NV Alt, notational
Hmm.
velocity. Yeah.
Okay. And with a lot of people see you, your the linking, your thinking, and Obsidian, and your whole like massive web of notes and all of that, right? Um, but what people I think don't see necessarily is, maybe you've shown it, is how did you actually, like, what does your PKM system look for, when you're actually working, like at Better Call Saul, like, what was the actual end output that you were creating? Because a lot of people, some of the people may look at like what you've created, and they're like it's almost like your note taking system is so beautiful that that almost looks like the output. But I think that's almost like the means to create output is, you're linking your thinking in Obsidian. And so, like, what does the means to creating the show, or, being the working on the show Better Call Saul, what does that look like? Like, what does your Obsidian Vault look like for, your actual, assistant production work?
Yeah. So when I was a coordinator, a post coordinator, post production coordinator, on a show on Netflix called Chambers, there were a lot of delays on the first two episodes. Thankfully,
Hmm.
what that meant was I had a lot more time in my role where I didn't have to do anything. Now, instead of just sitting back and being relaxed, I decided I would go into the rooms of the editors and the assistant editors and look over their shoulders about what they were doing, and I would take
Interesting.
notes. And those notes would be a mixture of physical and mixture in the drafts app. And then
Hmm.
I would go
Okay.
back to my desk because you kind of have to be at your desk
This
still.
is pre-COVID, right?
This is pre-COVID. It's
Okay.
2018, I think.
Yeah.
And and
So you're
then
working in the office, and you
yep,
would go and like literally, yeah, sit over their shoulder and yeah, take notes. Yeah.
yeah, like an apprentice to a shoemaker in Renaissance Italy, and I'm just
Hmm.
like, how did you put that heel on?
Hmm.
Can you? Hey, I don't want to interrupt too much, but could you just show me what you did there? And then they would
Hmm.
play it back, and they would say you fade out this way, and you can fade in, and it'll give it this effect and that sort of thing. And so I was just, this was amazing. I'm dealing with people. I'm looking at people who have won Emmys on Mad Men, um, Breaking Bad, of course, and a lot of other shows. And it was a phenomenal learning experience. And then the assistant editors and all the work that they do. So I would take these notes, I'd go back to my desk, and then I would input them into, the stuff that we are interested in, into a system where I could start making connections and essentially make a field guide for myself about how to be an editor and an assistant editor in Hollywood. And so that's what I put together was my own field guide. And so
Hmm.
it was a bunch of linked notes because I had to have some random note on a sound effect trick that I
Hmm.
learned from Johnny,
Mm.
and then something else that I learned from Brian. And it's both about sound effects, but different things. One might be a fade in, one might be how to layer, multiple layers of sound effects on different tracks, or just best practices on how many tracks should we have. So this allowed me a way to compile all these things together. It was around that time. I mean, we're not there yet. So now tools, I had my main tool was the archive by the folks at
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Hmm.
zealotcasting.de.
Yeah.
So now that was my main tool, but I was trying to do other things, and I was asking around, and one of my friends I respect a lot was saying, you should try Notion, and I was like, that was totally not the answer. Notion's a
Hmm.
pretty amazing tool, but not for what we are trying to accomplish.
Hmm.
And then TiddlyWiki was actually one that I really enjoyed. It was a joyful tool. It was a little hard and clunky, and I didn't feel confident that my knowledge was reliably accessible. Even
Hmm.
though, like, if you know what you're doing, I don't know. I don't want to go into technicals, but in the end, that's what I did. So, long story short, mixture of analog and drafts notes, take it
Hmm.
all back to the system, start making connections, have a field guide. And that process, though, made it so I didn't even have to, half the time, I didn't have to work with the field guide because I had processed it multiple times myself.
But what is the field guide? What you're saying?
Field guide I mean, if I'm giving it a title, it'd be the field guide for editing in Hollywood.
Gotcha. So you were kind of trying to build out, go, look over the shoulder of these, the wizards of their craft
Yes.
and create your own, like, your own field guide for, you were trying to create like this knowledge base to teach yourself how to become an expert in this craft, essentially. And you were kind of like duct taping these different tools, which I agree. Those tools are kind of like each one is kind of for a unique, different, purpose. You were trying to duct tape them kind of all together to create this field guide so that you could glean like the key insights and help master your craft in this field.
Yes. And that process, as messy as it is, and it doesn't matter, analog, digital, that is the thinking process. It's not when you
Hmm.
take the note, it's what you do with it as you're trying to see how it relates to other things. And I was getting stuck. I had maps in Evernote. I didn't call
Hmm.
them maps of content, but they were, you'd have to find a very special URL, Evernote URL, and then link that and copy and paste it to get it into
Yep.
essentially, a table of content, but truly more of a map of content. And then all that was broken when I went plain text. In the archive, it wasn't any easier. But that's what I was trying to do. I was trying to have these higher level, higher order notes where I could compile these links for things like this field guide, and it
Gotcha.
was working. It was
Hmm.
me going through the process was teaching myself, but it's not what I enjoy so much now. with a tool
Hmm.
like Obsidian and
Yeah.
where the linked based tools have gone.
Yeah, and it's kind of what I kind of visualize in you describing that and grabbing those Evernote links is you were kind of probably building the very first rudimentary version of one of the things in terms that you are known for, which is the maps of content, right? Which is like kind of like table of content to your, like it's kind of like almost like the index for your field guide, essentially, right? So you're kind of like creating maybe like a rudimentary version with like Evernote links, which are, yeah, I've only had brief experience with that, and it was not super friendly. I know you kind of derided them a little bit too. Is like is yeah, their whole URLs, and Obsidian made it just super simple, super fast, and yeah, so that's kind of the yeah, so that's kind of your goal with this is that knowledge base. And real quick, before we dive more into linking your thinking stuff, I also heard this is from like one of my anti-netters. I had him on in like a podcast, type of interview, and he was talking about like linking your thinking and you, and he mentioned that you like one of the pieces. I haven't found this anywhere, but one of the pieces of your origin story was the getting the great books or a great books subscription. Is that right? Is that a story about you, like maybe from your mom or your grandma
Yeah.
as a gift, and you wanted to kind of link all of those characters or all the concepts together? Is that also a piece of this story?
Yeah. So the exact details on that one was it was 2016, the U.S. going through a turbulent time with the presidential election. And just overall in my life, too, there were a lot of things in LA. There's turbulence. And I
Hmm.
think something that I just have really enjoyed, if we think about the elements, there's like earth and fire and water, air, whatever. But I wanted more earth. Like I wanted more sense of my place, of a grounding, of a calm. Information age, all these things like want to push us around and get us swirling in the air, or like underwater where we're drowning, or on fire, you know. And I just wanted some roots. So I was like, okay. So basically, I asked my mom, could we combine a few different presents here into the future? What our mom's good for. I'm lucky in that case. I said I would really love the Loeb, Loeb, the Loeb Classical Library in digital form,
Hmm.
so I can read the ancient stories, because I can't really articulate it. Maybe I kind of can now, but I felt like if I could tether myself to the ancient stories of the past and see how much is still exactly the same, that it would give me this tremendous sense of place and grounding. And so that's ultimately what it did. And I just felt the desire to help others in that same way, like give them a sense of grounding.
Hmm.
Um, so like with the stuff in Obsidian, when that beta came out, I never had an intention to like have a course and all that. This is all like new territory for everyone, and it just sort of some of those thoughts of grounding resonated. And so I mean, what is that map of content? It's a way to feel more grounded if there's ever chaos from going note to note. Hey, we all know that's great for serendipity, but it might feel a little uneasy sometimes. So the mapping notes were a way for me to stay grounded in my knowledge.
Hmm.
Yeah,
And give me an example of one of those the Loeb classical books that you read and that resonated
yeah.
with you. And then what was that book, that idea when you yeah. So give me an example there.
So the Persians, and I can't remember which Greek, there are four and they all have similar names, but I think it's the oldest one of the oldest plays that we have. So I wanted
Hmm.
something that felt like it was a play, something kind of theatrical.
Hmm.
And I want to say it was Aeschylus, if I'm
Hmm.
saying that
Okay.
correctly. I could be off, but it's the
I've
Persians.
no idea.
And okay, and the context behind it is so cool because it's this Greek playwright who also I believe was a Greek general, because
Okay.
everyone who was around then who was a man also probably was in the military,
Hmm.
but they would do annual festivals and they would have plays. And so he wrote a play called The Persians.
Hmm.
And we can speculate, but this is a cathartic thing for war war veterans who have PTSD coming back and trying to figure out things. It's cathartic for them. It's also a way to gloat. So on the surface, it's a way to be like, yeah, we beat the Persians, because it's talking about when the Persians come back after they've been defeated,
Hmm.
and Xerxes, I believe, and Xerxes' mother, and the
Hmm.
shame around all this defeat. And you
Hmm.
think, oh, it's just a gloating Greek story, but no, it's really dealing with the issues surrounding war from all sides. So, like any great art, there's like this subversive quality that gets us to really relate to other people. So that one resonated massively, because I think in my youth I would have thought this is a great way for the Greeks to gloat over the Persians. But a few years later, I think, man, this has so much depth to it, and
Hmm.
it's part of the human experience. So that was exactly what I needed. It was like this feeling of universality and our place. We're in the 2000s, part of the human story. Hopefully,
Hmm.
it doesn't end with us in radioactive disaster, but it's just part of this story, and so it allowed me to feel connected that way.
Yeah, yeah, fascinating. Yeah, yeah. So it kind of taught you like how to glean the deeper principles, and so that you can kind of link them together and continue to evolve them, over a longer period of time. And then, you used like, the oldest, or some of the oldest, most classic, richest pieces of literature and writings to do that. So that's interesting. Yeah, that makes sense. Did you put that type of material into Obsidian? Are those like there's links in there, and is that how you did it?
I have some, but no, I for that one I didn't have the intention to. Um, there's some things like also
Hmm.
Don Quixote.
Yeah.
It's been 2 years since I started it on audiobook.
Hmm.
I'm still going through it. I'm almost done, but I'm not. I
Hmm.
haven't taken a single note. I haven't looked online. I'm just
Yep.
trying to experience it,
Hmm.
and then later on, typically it just changes, Scott, depending on what we're trying to accomplish. But for both the Persians and this one, it's more just a feeling. And then later on, things will start to bubble up, and I'll say, yes, that's something I want to work with. And then I'll make the note, I'll make the
Yeah.
index card, whatever it is, and then I'll start linking it.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a kind of a delayed. You let it like kind of ruminate in the mind, before you kind of create like the main note essentially for it.
Yeah. So,
Um,
like one with Don Quixote is, it seems to me like I really want to look into that, because at least in the audio version, they're always saying that, and it's hilarious when
hmm.
Sancho Panza is always like, "It seems to me that," whatever, and I just love it. So little things like that's a really strange thing that has nothing to do with the plot, but that's what's resonating with me, and I want to explore that.
Yeah.
I don't know why. At the very least, when I talk to my best friend over in Montana who's read it, I can bring that up, and who's
Yeah.
also listened to the audiobook, and we'll bond on that. It'll be fun.
Yeah. Yeah, and I actually read that in 2021, and I talked about it because it's like I
Oh
quit.
wow.
I quit, reading it because it was like I spent like probably 8 months, chipping away at it, and it's a beast. And
Yeah.
I found myself quitting reading it, and then like getting, but I'm like, God, it's like the rest of my life I'm going to hear Don Quixote because it continually comes up, and I'm gonna regret quitting reading it. So I picked it back up. I think that happened twice. I finally finished it, and what I think it is as well, it introduces a lot of concepts, but also, by I know what you're talking about. So I have this almost like this hidden language of understanding, which is kind of a concept I think that I heard you talking about with the guy from the cultural tutor. It's like, you know, culture is kind of like a language. Don Quixote and an understanding of literature is kind of like a language. So it's really cool to be able to like understand precisely the journey you're going through on that, and just wanting to let that ruminate on your mind. It's like that's the type of book that you don't sit with like an index card and, every few pages create a note on. That's the one where you just let
Exactly.
it flow. Yeah. Um, well, yeah, let's start to jump into the linking your thinking stuff. I thank you for sharing all of this fascinating stuff in regards to your background. I think all of these, my audience and all the PKM people, watching this and listening to this are gonna, um, find that very valuable to, because they just see you as this whiz kid master of PKM and Obsidian and all of these links. So thank you for going deeper on your background, and and how you kind of came to, you know, develop essentially and earn linking your thinking. You know, it's not like you've just invented this out of thin air. You earned it over, I don't know, years, 5+ years, a decade worth of taking notes and knowledge development and thinking about this stuff. So, um, I think a year ago you were wrapping up like season 6 of Better Call Saul, and you were still kind of doing like 50% you know uh, editing and work in Hollywood, and then 50% linking your thinking. Have
Mhm.
you transitioned? I think I listened to a podcast interview recently where you've decided to transition and go full time and full focus on linking your thinking. Is that still the case? And how has that been? How long have you been, focused on this full time?
Yeah, so I guess looking at the calendar, it's been 13 months since I've
Oh,
been
nice.
done on any show. Now,
Hmm.
there are still projects in development, but they're not. It's a little bit differently. I'm not looking to get hired. I'm looking to do something.
Hmm.
So it's definitely a difference. Um, you know, that's using a craft and a skill. Excuse me, a trade and a craft that I've developed how to use a certain piece of software, Avid Media Composer, and bring craft to it, bring art to it. Um, I just still have a couple projects though, but they're more related to knowledge management. So
Hmm.
it's a little bit different. It's taking what I've learned and seeing how it can be applied to somewhere else. But long story short, yeah, the last 13 months I have been done because it seems to me that knowledge management is growing, and it's able to support me. It's able to support my right hand man since the beginning, Dan. And we're trying to
Hmm.
bring on a couple. We have a couple other part timers who also went through the workshop, and just amazing people in there. Um, and I really want to fight for it because I think knowledge management can get. I I I feel really strong about this, Scott. But productivity, if left to its own devices, will smother knowledge management. And so I want to be that person that's like, back, get
Hmm.
back, like you shall not pass.
Hmm.
Little Gandalf there to say, like, yes, of course there's overlap. The Venn diagram is there, but there are things that are just there for the sake of thinking themselves that don't have to be because we want to output. I
Hmm.
mean, it just strips away the soul of thinking, the joy, oftentimes. It's great to have the forcing functions of productivity, and you want to do something, you have a goal in mind, you want to output. I don't want to get rid of that, but what I'm
Hmm.
saying is that personal knowledge management needs to have some space for
Yeah.
wandering,
Hmm.
and that's what really gets me going. So along with it being able to support me now, I also feel an obligation and a responsibility to push back against um, the the level that the water will naturally settle to if people don't talk about it, and it will
Hmm.
just be how can we get more things done? And it's like
Yes,
no.
yes, 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 yes. It's a lot of people find and believe that PKM is a subfield or a subcategory within maybe the productivity market, and it's completely different altogether. I mean, you can kind of this is my views, my opinions. You can kind of jerry rig, productivity to be like, to fall into like your PKM system and to be stored, in your PKM system. Like I've, some file, like some, cards back there, a section, a branch, for like daily to-do lists and goals and stuff like that.
Hmm.
However, what I have found, and I like to use the term knowledge development because it's all about, that's kind of how
Yeah.
Luhmann used it, is he would read a book, he would use a bib card, which is called like where you have brief observations with the page number. They would act as staging posts, for your thought to ruminate on. And then you would write out the main card and develop knowledge, right? It's not like he didn't use it as, for productivity or his to-do lists, stuff like that. I think that's kind of what you're saying as well. I think Lumen was always a lot of the times kind of focused on output. Like on average, he was writing, one, always working on a project, like one article, one, about a certain aspect a month, one or two, which kind of over 30 years, formed the basis for his books, right? But I think he was still in kind of exploration mode, in reading, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it sounds like to me like what you are advocating for and what you want to fight for is, there's the kind of dichotomy between exploration versus exploitation. Exploitation is the let's
Yes.
exploit as much, output in the finite amount of time as possible. And that's kind of like what the productivity school of thought and that whole realm, falls into. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
you seem like you are on the exploration. Let's wander through this forest and, see what we explore and find. Is that kind of what you're saying? That's what you strongly
Absolutely.
believe in? Okay.
Yeah, that's why I have to write it down just to make sure I can ruminate more on that. And it's analog writing.
Hell
So,
yeah. There we go. You may not hear it, but there's I didn't think what 1800 diehard anti-netter analog knowledge folk out there raising their fist in the air cheering for you writing it down an analog. Um
yeah.
yeah, and let's touch on this too is what is like what is who is linking your thinking for? And then we're gonna follow up with who is it not for? So
Mhm.
tell me, like, who is linking your thinking for? Like, what types of people and yeah.
Yeah, Scott, I think about this every single day. I'm not even
Mm-hmm.
joking because
Mm-hmm.
it's so difficult. I'm trying to think. You go to the grocery store, you know what the grocery store is for, is to get
Mm-hmm.
food because we need to eat food.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so difficult to say who is linking your thinking for. So let me try a couple. Definitely for knowledge workers, right? But I don't like that term. I don't
I know.
really
What
see,
is a knowledge worker?
right? Yeah, I don't see myself as a knowledge worker, but people would probably call me that.
Mm-hmm.
I just so titles like that are kind of difficult. Use cases can be helpful. I think there are 6 use cases that I try to say, like, is this you? Do you want to?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I guess the 6 that we're using, I'm not sure if it's the best 6 or whatever, but do you want to do better research? Are you on that research side of things? Do you want to make sense of the world? Okay, this is pretty vague, but I really want to spell it out. I want to give it space where people can say, yeah, that is me. I'm a lifelong learner. I'm just always curious. I have many different interests. They don't seem like they connect always. That's making sense of the world. You want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to be, this is kind of a new thing, a content creator?
Mm-hmm.
That could be entrepreneur, influencer. You're pumping out the content.
Mm-hmm.
But there's another part, and I don't want to say fighting for this distinction, but I think it's important to make the distinction between content creation and then something long form writing. That's
Mm-hmm.
more like long form writing. Of course, there's overlap, but we also need to say that when we write those articles and blogs and essays, it's a little different than a dissertation.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little
Yeah.
different than a book,
Mm-hmm.
a screenplay,
Yep.
whatever that form takes, a comic book. It doesn't matter. There are more complex projects out there. Long form writing, let's call that. So that's the 4th use case where linking your thinking principles can help. The 5th one is wanting to journal. We'll call that like a self guidance.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to have people have called it different things, personal development, but I think self guidance and expanded creativity is probably at the heart of that.
Mm-hmm.
Just being in check with yourself and your life and how your values, whatever that might be. And then that 6th one is, do you want help with your projects, your productivity, your efforts,
Mm-hmm.
managing your actions?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's a real thing. I do want to push space against the productivity, but it's still there. It's still part of
Mm-hmm.
life. It's just it gets all the talk. So that's why we push against it. So
Yeah.
who's linking your thinking for? Probably those somewhere in those 6 use cases where
Mm-hmm.
people want to get better at one of those 6 things, broadly speaking. And
Yeah.
I don't know. There's so many different ways to talk about it. It's very difficult to figure out,
Mm-hmm.
like, who is it for?
Do you have a specific instance or use case or that's like do you have a specific customer or person that you've seen code through linking your thinking in your mind and have a completely transformative experience? In my mind, like I really kind of cater to more of the writers, researchers. I don't even put number six, the productivity people on my list of, for being served with like, an anti-net, like which is more for just developing knowledge. And I wanted to check in with you. Do you have like, some customer, some person, um, that has come to mind and you've seen like a complete transformation in how they've been able to like use linking your thinking and the principles to really just transform their craft there and what they do.
Too many to talk about. There's one that we just published today, though, from Karen Hume, who is
Hmm.
like a multi-teacher of the year in Canada. Has written multiple books, and she's recently retired, but wants to just get her. I don't know if it's thoughts in order, if that's doing it justice, but more of that makes sense of the world, like use case number two, and probably also ties into use case five, which is the self guidance and expanded creativity,
Hmm.
and just kind of tap into those. The need to research is less, that first use case. There might still be some content creation that she's got in mind. She's already done the long form writing. I wouldn't be surprised if more uh, with less deadlines that she goes back to that.
Hmm.
But I think I think it's getting people who it seems the best for, and this won't market in a sexy way, but when we feel like the world's on top of us because of
Hmm.
the information age and the noise and all the chaos, is for people who want to get back to being on top of the world
Hmm.
with their mind and their thoughts, having a place where they feel that is reliable, that they can have their thinking, their thoughts supported, and also to power those thoughts for whatever
Hmm.
they're trying to do.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's probably like, yeah, the majority of people can probably resonate with the feeling like information overload, overload mode, um, and out of control. Yeah, so it's like you kind of essentially help them, rethink, slow down, get more in control of that data hose, that information hose that everyone is plugged into, and kind of like essentially what you're, I think, at least for me too, is when I went through your course, it's kind of good to think about how you think, like that meta process of slowing down and seeing how others think, and is very is yeah, super super helpful. And I think it's good for most people to do, because that's like what you spend most of your time doing during the workday, is like, why don't you audit how you actually think and develop and manage knowledge. um, and so here's the more interesting question is, I love I think Charlie Munger always talks about this: invert, always invert. So talk about,
Mm.
the exact opposite of, the question. So, who specifically is, who do you think, linking your thinking is not for? Like, who do you think, that you may have found people like signing up, stumbling into it, and they, you're like, what, this is probably not for you. Or maybe it's a good thing that maybe they didn't sign up. And what types of people? Maybe it's the productivity junkies, like the workflow warriors out there
Nice.
who are
Yeah.
obsessed with, you know, folder structures and coming up with acronyms for, arranging their, digital directories or something like that. Is there a specific kind of avatar or person that you think, um, linking your thinking is not for?
I think it's someone who is in the middle of a career where it's less about processing information or knowledge and more about they just know they have to get things done. Maybe they're less in control of their work environment, but they know there's this thing that they need to do. They're very clear on what that thing is. It doesn't change too often, and they just need to get it done. Then, then as far as helping that career, maybe they don't need anything massively. There are a lot of careers that we can think of. Any manual careers, the blue collar work. Um, is this going to help you? Like if what you do every day is shovel, is this going to help you shovel better? It's not. It's going to get in the way because, I mean, after a while, there's only so many ways to learn about leverage. or, like how to shovel better.
Hmm.
So, and I don't mean like I love those jobs. In fact, I think the reason I bring that up is because one of my most cherished memories is digging a ditch for fun.
Really? Yeah.
For fun, yeah.
Uh-huh.
No one was telling me to do it. I wanted to. I
Hmm.
wanted to divert water that was ruining this dirt road, and
Hmm.
just make it kind of go around the road until you could cross underneath. And man, I just love that.
Hmm.
There's something about the connection. Talking about the analog and the anti-net. It's a beautiful thing to use our bodies and connected with the environment in this
Hmm.
way that you feel like, hey, we're working together.
Yeah.
Sometimes we lose that with the sense. But so
Yeah.
those are a couple of use cases, anyways, where it's not for you. And then to your last point, the hyper productivity workflow warriors,
Hmm.
yeah, because or people who want to be told exactly what to do, I'll lump them in there too. As you know from going through the workshop, this is the opposite of everything that we grew up with digital folder structures.
Hmm.
They're a bunch of folders, and you have to twirl things down to kind of find if something is there. And with links, especially digital links, folders are the least important thing. Now,
Hmm.
you still might want some. I still advocate for a few, but you don't need them. You really don't. You just need one large, massive folder that's where everything lives.
Hmm.
So that makes people feel uncomfortable, especially the top-down thinkers. And I skew towards top-down thinking. Probably why I like things like Obsidian and Link so much, because it helps me remain bottom up and
Hmm.
helps me remain. It forces me to remain generative and creative and look for the intersections. And then my natural tendency is to create that map to kind of make sense of everything, give me some order again.
Hmm.
But that interplay between the top down and the bottom up is the beautiful thing. So it's not for people who are going to feel there are only a few sometimes, but they're like, I need more structure. I need more. I don't want to do this. Like, tell me the answers right now. It's like, well, I can't give you the answer because you're building your own system.
Yeah.
These are the frameworks. There are notes,
Hmm.
there are maps. And I prefer having a home note too. How those
Hmm.
things interact is all there is to it.
Yeah. 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 Fascinating. And yeah, and you kind of touched upon this too, and uh, with what do you think? How has since I think I took linking your thinking in early 2021,
Yeah.
and how has the course and how has the material evolved since then? What is new, and like if I were to take it today, like what new developments or new additions have you added, or maybe it's you haven't added, and that's fine too. It's because I think it was, a lot of the stuff was evergreen and very principle based, which is cool because I think, the anti-netters, people use the analog, knowledge development, right? They could still benefit from a lot of the principles and ideas
Hmm.
that you introduce. Um, that said, have you done anything unique in this upcoming cohort, and what is unique? Anything you're excited about?
Yeah. Well, first, very little from the backbone changes because the backbone is the core is the core. And
Hmm.
again, that's we link notes. Typically, they're kind of small. We link them together. We get to a point where we feel a little bit of overwhelm, so we figure out how to gather them all together in a single place. That would be our map of content. And I also advocate that we want one home note, that top down note where we can then jump off into all of our main maps and then get into our notes. So generally speaking, you got notes, you have maps, and you have one home note. And
Okay.
so you might recall idea emergence, and it had
Hmm.
5 levels. We're not going to go through the levels, but they're all there. And
Hmm.
then it's just whether or not there are links or not that add the extra levels. But
Yeah.
that's it. And then
Yeah.
so the other thing that's similar is the bottom up structure of the curriculum. So
Hmm.
we don't start with, hey, let's set up your folders, or hey, let's teach you how to use Readwise so you can capture stuff and figure out your capture workflow. Um, I'm a huge advocate in making people feel uncomfortable, but comfortably uncomfortable. So what we do is we really start bottom up because we're
Hmm.
so used to top down. So let's think about what it's like and what we're actually trying to capture. And that's why we take a survey at the start, the PKM planet. What are you actually trying to do? What's signal to you? What's noise? And then we can figure out how, those thought, whatever you're trying to capture and connect, that's the stuff you're working on. So you
Hmm.
don't have all this noise. And then we build up through note to note relationships, creating that first map where we gather links together, maps to maps, and then eventually we have the library and the home note. And so all this creates your idea ecosystem. I'm now calling it an idea verse.
Hmm.
And that's just
Yeah, I've
simply,
seen that.
yeah, and that's to carve out a space to say that there is something out there. We could call it an integrated thinking environment. But it's something, and it's connected, and not all external knowledge management is connected. And so we
Hmm.
need to say there's something special about this. My hope is a term like Ideaverse, after it's said 10,000 times, people are like, yeah, I understand what
Hmm.
that means. And we
Yeah.
do need an extra term, believe it or not.
Hmm.
I
Yeah, it's better than integrated thinking environment. The world does not need yet another acronym, ITE or something.
Yeah.
Idea
Yeah.
versus a better encapsulator.
And I love, like, after Ideaverse to say it is an integrated thinking environment. Like, that's a really good technical term to define what's happening.
Hmm.
At the same time, we just need something that when I say it to my nephew, he says, "Oh, that's cool. I get that, and I'm kind of curious about it."
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, and what you've kind of described with like the home note and the maps of, essentially the maps is essentially, what, and I've showed it in videos to my like anti-netters, and it's in a, there's kind of similar concepts. Is it's almost like a, with my book, like I wrote a book on the anti-net Zettelkasten where I went deep into the history, the roots of note boxes and knowledge development and how we managed knowledge, from the early Renaissance, and up through everything. And how I wrote that book is I kind of used, it's my each card I created like my own, essentially, it was, you can call it a maps of content, cards, that act almost as like the tables of contents for the book, which then pointed me to various numeric alpha, card addresses like 4214/2A, for
Mm.
this concept on like the second mind and all of this stuff. Yet another buzzword, not second brain, second mind.
Is that kind of like extended mind, like the Annie
Yes,
Murphy
yes.
Paul? Yeah,
Hmm.
I'm
Yeah,
really
that's
I'm
the
knee
book.
deep in that stuff right now, and just absolutely love it. And it rings true, right? Like
Yeah.
once you start, you're like, yeah, of course. I
Yep.
mean, of,
Yep.
of course we think with
Yeah.
our environment.
That's what I was going to say when you were talking about the digging the ditch. It's like a lot of our thinking and processing, happens outside of just, the mind. And, is yeah, that whole idea, the extended mind, which is kind of how Lumen, and we didn't get deep into why the obsession over Lumen and stuff like that, right? But that's kind of how Lumen thought of his Zettelkasten. It was, for the first few years, was just kind of like a way to store notes, but then it kind of almost became an extended mind and its own consciousness, which he talked about. He called it the ghost in the box, where he had a communication relationship with his extended mind. So it's kind of like, that voice when you're reviewing your that note card, essentially about the essay and what it is. You have also this other internal dialogue, not like an internal monologue, but like an internal dialogue going on of visualizing who you were, like the Nick Milo of that time when you wrote down that note. So
Hmm.
that adds like that contextual piece, as you're going through your old notes, which is what Lumen kind of talked about as well. Where I'm going with all of this is I think the principles that you introduce in linking your thinking, if my anti-netters, the people that are using, the Lumanian note box with the index and the, your own note cards, is they can use and learn the principles and follow along and also still use analog, and go through linking your thinking, kind of inspire ideas, with what you teach. That's
Hmm.
that's
Yeah.
essentially, because I can see it, and but what are your thoughts on people that are like, analog Zettelkasten folks and anti-netters taking linking your thinking? Do you think that'll be a useful exercise and a use of time, for those types of people? Or what's your thoughts?
Well, at the end of the day, the answer is probably going to be yes from me. I'm selling a workshop. I'd love for those people to be involved, right? But really, if someone is an anti-netter and they love knowledge, they love learning from other people, and this is really a concentrated learning environment with a lot of other people. So I told you what was the same, but what's different are all those ways that we try to tweak the experience to
Hmm.
maximize the outcomes that everyone who attends receives, whether that's ways that we allow people to connect more organically so there's less friction involved. So we've been on discourse, which I've enjoyed because it allows for the long form discussions, but it's kind of prevented us from a lot of live interactivity that we're trying to do. So often, it's like, hey, we just
Hmm.
want to set up an event and have people come and kind of make
Hmm.
it halfway spontaneous,
Yeah.
like community members. And so that's where discourse, it wasn't designed for that. And unfortunately, it's not evolving at any, it's evolving at a glacial pace.
Is
Meanwhile,
that like
there's some
the
other.
forum essentially? That
Yes,
the
that would
forum?
be the
Okay.
forum. That would be how
Yeah.
you experienced the workshop. So
Hmm.
up until this very last one, we've all been on discourse as the forum. As it's really cool because we had that built-in breadcrumb structure where you could always go
Hmm.
back up to the map of content
Yep.
up for that unit table of content. Same
Hmm.
same idea. And then, but now we're moving to a different platform that will allow for more interactions. But it's really trying to make things as immersive as possible and allow for multiple avenues of expression or interaction, I should say. Engagement is probably the best word. Live session, great. Chat, you kind of have this sidebar chat that's giving like the stream of context. Some people love that, some people don't. We have discussions on the forum. Some are long form, some are going to be direct messages. We have live sessions that are on targeted topics. The idea though is this is a whole mouth, like you bite into something and it's got all the flavors there, including umami. It's just got it all. And that way, whatever you're after, it's there, it's resonating with you. And then you can say, like, hey, I might be an analog person, but I'm happy I know, or at least am aware of what Light's calling the three paradigms of notes.
Hmm.
The
Yeah.
idea that notes can change. What does that mean in an analog world? Do I agree with it? And
Hmm.
these conversations start to happen. So I
Yeah.
find that to be quite thrilling.
Yeah. 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 Sounds awesome. Sounds exciting. Yeah. Just constantly iterating. The course was already great. The experience was really cool. I liked, the workshops and getting your reps in. I remember that from the course, like that's one of the
Yeah.
key takeaways. So yeah, that's it's awesome to hear that you're continuing to evolve this thing, and I'm glad that are uh, you know uh, essentially leaving poor Better Call Saul and off and going deep on this, and then also fighting for not getting lumped into this being just a productivity tool, but like a knowledge exploration tool. So yeah, and I also before we I think we've already gone on and covered quite a lot. One area I did want to talk about too is just your general thoughts on the space, and maybe we can get into the future of linking your thinking, of how you foresee it in this space. I commend you for being and linking your thinking. You're fantastic, great at marketing, and you've done like the cohort courses. You did the state of PKM, which is a great, kind of like a kind of message and way to kind of gather and consolidate like the thoughts of everything, and also position yourself, the state of PKM as like the State of the Union address as the president of PKM. But it's cool to see you kind of like state what you the whole PKM industry, and your live conferences, and where and then also you clearly are pretty savvy, like you have the ascension, the idea of ascension and black belts kind of essentially
Mm.
for boxing and all of that. um and this is just my interpretation looking at the space, is there's the Tiago Forte and building a second brain, and then there's like the rite of passage and that
Mm.
cohort. Were you inspired, like are you familiar with those courses? Were you kind of like inspired with when you created the linking your thinking from any particular? you know, like productivity course or anyone in particular, or what was your, because I've come into this space and observed things and seen, you and building a second brain. So I didn't know what it looked like when you first started. What was the landscape when you started? Like, were you inspired by anyone? Were you inspired not to do things the way that other courses or, people
Yeah.
teach in this space? So, yeah, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, it's funny because being fully immersed in Los Angeles, in Hollywood, I wasn't involved in the space. I wasn't aware of anything until the Obsidian beta, and I
Okay.
started sharing some things. And eventually, I shared the first version of the Light Kit in May
Okay.
2020. It wasn't called that; it had a different acronym at that time.
Hmm.
And then, that was because in the first couple of months in Obsidian beta, because I joined in March 2020, it was this really I mean, it still is, but there was a time with the pandemic. Everyone was on there. We were helping to kind of give feedback on the app itself, guide discussions. Talk. I was coming from the archive, so I had some opinions on what was working for me that were
Gotcha.
probably maybe a little bit narrower in focus
Hmm.
in hindsight than the brilliant developers in their more holistic, non-opinionated view of how to do something. So that was just a beautiful time. And then I'd share little things of like what I was doing, and that resonated well. And then for fun, this is all just joy driven. I wanted to put stuff together. I can't remember the first thing I shared. It might have been like a quotes pack, just showing like linked quotes and
Hmm.
different things. But a couple days later, I think it was that first light kit version. I think it was ICM. I can't even remember now. And but eventually, they resonated with that on that forum, and they said,
Hmm.
tell us more. Like, what is this all about?" And I'm like, "Well, I
Yeah.
know this is working, but I just kind of didn't think other people were interested." So eventually, I wanted to do more, and it was around that time that someone said, "You should do a course."
Hmm.
And maybe it can be a course like this one called Building a Second Brain.
Okay.
that's when i
Interesting.
first that's when I first so that was probably around June 2020.
Hmm.
And I was already starting to like reach out to a few people on Discord to say, would you like to be a part of something privately, just to kind of, I have like 6 different weeks. I'd like to put something together and share it with you, based on the kit and this idea of maps and idea emergence. That was the big
Hmm.
thing I had to I felt like no one's talking about this. I don't know where, I yeah, idea emergence, and I really don't know
Hmm.
what the provenance behind that is, other than just it emerged. Like
Hmm.
recognizing that the note to note was not enough for me. I like these maps, and we need
Hmm.
one high map.
Hmm.
That was it. Those 3 levels. So I shared that stuff. I still have some awesome drawings in Excalibur I'm very proud of, even though we have
Hmm.
more polished versions now.
Yeah.
But yeah, so as I was creating that first sort of private course, someone's like, "You should do this," and that's when I first saw that there was, Tiago Forte's course, Building a Second Brain. And I think I've mentioned this a few times, and to him too. And I consider us kind of like friends at this point. It's really a
Hmm.
strange thing, because I had this viscerally negative reaction to seeing
Hmm.
what Building a Second Brain course was about.
Hmm.
And I have since, he's taken my course and I've since taken his. It's a wonderful course, but it's not how I think, or it's not the whole story is what I'm trying to say. There's not a one size fits all, end of story, and we can all move on. And so when I saw that, I again felt like there's more out there, everyone, and this is just part of society and culture and the productivity mindset, school of
Hmm.
thought, like you said.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
just want
That's
something else. I just want to push back and say there's this other thing out there for knowledge.
Yeah, which is awesome that you've done, and thank you for doing this and creating that course. It's that's kind of what I'd never have taken Tiago's course, the Building a Second Brain. What I've gleaned and have discovered about it though is that it is much more productivity. It's like you're not necessarily building a second brain as in terms of like a knowledge base or a second mind as to develop knowledge. It's kind of like here is a productivity framework for organizing information and being more productive. That's kind of my interpretation without, having given it a fair shot and actually taken the course.
Mhm.
Whereas yours is like, I think in a completely different, it's not a subcategory of productivity, it's a completely different category together, which is knowledge exploration. And that's kind of what PKM has, essentially become. Um, yeah, that's really interesting. And the other interesting thing is what I've gathered from this too is, when I kind of came into the Zettelkasten space, I had come into the Zettelkasten space with a premonition that it was like a cult, because I read on foam, my introduction, before I tried Obsidian, was to foam, which is of that open source, VS Code version of Rome Research. And
Mhm.
on foam's principle, their like principles page, they said, you don't need to follow or join a cult to, do PKM, and you don't need to do Zettelkasten. So I equated Zettelkasten with, being a cult, which I guess, I discovered later on that it was actually Rome who they were talking about, because Rome used to go as by Rome cult, or like something like that.
Yeah.
And so I actually entered the Zettelkasten space and was kind of like a bull in a china shop with, Sasha, and we argued quite a bit. So, but we have since become, actually like respectful friends, of I don't agree with a lot of the ways that he teaches digital Zettelkasten, like using dates for IDs, and I just the overall thing, like about it. That said, I've come to, like, we've had dialogues, and we did like, YouTube video, like a long form like podcast together, and we've
Mm.
really kind of gone above and beyond that kind of like the surface level, oh, good versus bad type of, duality, and we've gone above and been like, oh, what you're saying here really makes sense. And it's like, how can we actually apply that type of thinking to digital versus, or apply that to analog?
Mhm.
So that's funny that you kind of had that same type of experience with Tiago. What's more interesting is you seem to have, you started in the Zettelkasten space, but this is how I would have interpreted it, is there's just so much crap and like complications and majoring in the minor within the digital Zettelkasten space of how you're supposed to write notes or do things, which, it's, kind of what I'm gathering from it is you were like, why are we wasting our time with all of this stuff? Why don't we just link thoughts and, use Obsidian maps of content to kind of get at what we're really trying to do? So, and then you saw something essentially in the marketplace that's like, people would really benefit and value from this. And, I also commend you for, and I'm fully in support. I want to help you in your, crusade to make sure that PKM is separate and not lumped into the productivity workflow warriors space.
Mhm.
So there needs to be a space for that. And, I'm happy to support you and lend a hand in, we'll have our anti-netters, we'll be like the Irish in Braveheart. We'll be that group, like we'll support you in the battle, and we'll come and flank. So,
Yeah.
that's how I see it.
Yeah. No, I think you're on point with all of that, and that there is, again, on the flip side, there isn't a one size fits all. So if
Hmm.
you're looking to get more things done and you want a way to be more effective with your information resource management, so you can move ahead on your projects, then linking your thinking should not be your number one choice.
Hmm.
It can help, but I think there are better solutions out there. So it's, again, like, it's I'm far from casting aspersions on anyone's thoughts. Just like you with Sasha, there are just differences, and I think this space needs to be able to articulate those differences like we are. So everyone out there can recognize that, wow, yeah, it isn't one size fit. It is not one size fits all. So what am I trying to do again? And if it's, what are you trying, if I ask the question, what are you trying to do with knowledge, and you're thinking, well, I just want to get my projects done right now. Well, okay, that, probably try some other things out first, and then if you get stuck because you feel, now you have to work with knowledge and you need to connect ideas, and you're kind of getting stuck somewhere, well, then you can seek out other options, whatever that looks like. But I thought that
Yeah.
was a really good point too, with what you said, with recognizing the limitations of, the Zettelkasten approach. And it's like, I don't want to follow the rules. It's like we need some structure, but what I didn't want to look at it from like the gospel of Luhmann, as
Hmm.
wonderful of a person as he is, but that's all interpretation of. Yeah, I didn't want it to be interpreted to me by somebody else. And
Hmm.
in the end, I just wanted to know, like, how when you link knowledge together, what are the elements, the factors? Think about our physical world. We've got space, time, gravity, stuff like
Hmm.
that. What is
Hmm.
that in the linked world? And I
Hmm.
find that those same things are true. We can organize by space. We can organize
Hmm.
by time. We can organize by gravity. It's called
Yep.
importance. Whoa.
Mm. Mm.
And then
Yeah, it's
relationships,
interesting.
links.
Hmm.
And so it's an acronym I'm playing with. Really, I'm
You
playing with
know,
this one, but
that's
stir.
fascinating. Like I came up like after about 2 or 3 months after, I took Linear Thinking, I thought deeply about this and I organized my Obsidian Vault into time and space.
Oh, cool.
That's the two concepts of reality. It's
Yeah.
XYZ. XYZ is really essentially space, with like the altitude as well, like the other, the whatever third dimension of space. And then there's time. And we all have like space are those things that are, not defined necessarily by time. And then, like the time are are things like meeting notes or things that you would want to organize by time.
Mm-hmm.
I like that. That's interesting about the aspect of gravity as like that's kind of like a token of importance. It's like what is gravity? Gravity, is like metaphysical. And a lot of people, it's interesting is they think of metaphysical and they don't think that it's real. It's like, well, is gravity real? Gravity's metaphysical, right?
Mm.
It's like that's interesting of yeah, priority mapping priority or importance to gravity as a kind of way to you're essentially trying to create a map or a model of the world, a map or model of reality. The closer we get to it, I think the more effective our, essentially thinking system will become.
And that's an
So yeah, I like
interesting
that.
analog digital overlap. So digitally, and we can plant seeds. Just like when you had the index card and you just wrote something on it, so you could then kind of allow it to play in the background and see where that idea might lead, or you
Hmm.
think about it a bit more. In the digital world, we create a new note. You don't have to fill it out, but it's there. It can accumulate links, grow in
Hmm.
gravity, grow in importance essentially, which is gravity. Things are orbiting closer to it, and that can be an indication that, okay, we should dust this thing off and start talking about it, because we've accumulated a lot of different related notes on it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I love it. So you're continuing to kind of like, evolve the model of how to think about knowledge, which I think is people, you know, pre like all of this space they never thought about. Well, they did, but I think these tools allow us to more fluidly model and view like the graphs of Obsidian, model and view knowledge to kind of create these interesting almost models or lenses or interfaces into our knowledge, which is cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, awesome, man. Well, thank you for hopping on here. And I could have probably spent another, I don't know, hour going nerding out into the depths of which we didn't really talk about. Yeah, the Lumen and the anti-net and Zettelkasten and that whole space. One thing before we go is you talked about on email. It's like the obsession over the Lumanian note box or the Lumanian. Like I don't like the term Zettelkasten because a lot of people they what it means is note box or slip box in European English, right? And so many learned scholars throughout time had note boxes. Since the earliest documented one was Conrad Gessner in like the 1500s, and
Mm.
everyone has kind of like their own version of organizing analog physical notes in note boxes. The most common one was the Ryan Holiday system, which or not really his system or Robert Greene's system. It's
Mm-hmm.
what everyone's kind of done, which is you organize your notes if you even organize them by topic or by category, like
Mm.
or by book, right? So I
Yeah.
had done that for 15 about 15 since 2006. I had been doing 3 by 5 inch cards, storing all my analog note cards, and just wrapping them in rubber bands. I still have some boxes over there. Like the bottom boxes are my legacy ones that I haven't integrated and created the whole, you know, ID on them, address
Uh-huh.
on them yet. But I always ran into issues with, which is how do you, it's like if I have a section on, for instance, I have a section like 300 cards on Hemingway's rules for writing, which each one was like a rule, right? If I wanted to, you know, this is kind of a bad example, but like if I wanted to link to just one of the rules and talk about it and evolve it, like in the context of me working on another project, I couldn't really, I would have to rewrite it in analog form. And so the thing that Lumen's Notebox, kind of how it changed the game is he added those, those alphanumeric. I call it numeric alpha because it starts with a number. It's kind of like freeway exit numbers, like 13A, you know? You number each of your cards so that you can link to each individual thought, and you can kind of find your thoughts easily, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that was like the big game changer around really Lumen's system, you know. So from an actual vehicle, there is like some value there in how he did it. It was other scholars talked about, numbering each of your cards and then kind of being able to branch down on it. But I think so there is value in what he did, but one of the kind of the more hypey things that people get carried away with and the whole story of why people get attracted to Zettelkasten is because of how prolific he was,
Mm.
and which actually doesn't necessarily come from the Zettelkasten itself. That's the big irony. He wrote 70 books in 30 years and 600 like peer-reviewed publications in 30 years, which like I think averages like one or two papers published per month, which is insane. So a lot of people are attracted to it and they think it's the secret that the Zettelkasten is his secret weapon. What
Mm.
you actually find in some interviews is that that was not just the secret weapon. He was also a workaholic who loved what he did. From 8 a.m., he detailed out his daily routine. From 8 a.m. until 11 p.m., he would read all day and take these notes on a bib card and then develop it, into his own Zettelkasten system. And on top of that, like he set out, um, you know, when he started his academic career, saying my 30-year goal is to develop a theory of everything as it pertains to society. And he did not waver from that goal. So
Yeah.
that's the interesting thing is the system itself. Yeah, I think it's if you're an analog knowledge, if you love analog, right? And you also, but you up until that point, there was a lot of downsides about analog. Of how do I find each individual thought? There's no search feature. How do I link
Mm-hmm.
to each individual note? Lumen kind of solved for that, which I think is what the benefit is. But if you want to just create this, a Zettelkasten and expect to have 70 books pop out and, you know, 600 peer-reviewed papers without putting in effort and work, then you're barking up the wrong tree. So
Yeah.
that's something, you know, to be that is an interesting point to make. And I also don't like the way, like, I know Sasha has the Zettelkasten method, and I think it works for a lot of people, but I do not like. I do. I'm not a I'm not really hardcore heavy into. Oh, if you're using digital, you need to also do it the Zettelkasten way. I don't think that that is the case at all. I think understanding the workflow is certainly helpful. Like maybe learning what Lumen did. And I think that's where guys like Bob Dodo, have done a good job of actually teaching kind of like the overall purpose and goal, which is centers around writing and developing thought. But you don't want to get stuck on rules. And I don't like dates as being the IDs at all. I hate that. I went deep into discovering where it came from, and it actually came from a place it came from this place. I forgot. It's called like the Nomagachi organization system where you're supposed to organize your files by most recently opened. So
Mm.
it doesn't really make sense to even use the Zettelkasten dates anyways, because it's organizing files by the creation date. That doesn't make any sense. Anyway, you got me off on a tangent, but
No, no, I'm glad.
I
I'm
wanted to
glad.
state that.
Yeah, because I had some questions before we got on about that and some email exchanges. So I'm glad you did, because um, it's like understanding Zettelkasten is, it's, you go into this foggy land where there are all
Hmm.
sorts of other whispering voices in different areas. And
Yep.
so, like underneath the shrubs in the fog, and you're like, what did they just say? And it's like,
Yeah.
what is the true Zettelkasten, or, what are the important parts? And that's where I do think that, a detour from the fundamental principles. One of the reasons you were asking for me to come on, or one of the topics, is what's fundamental, what's universal about
Yeah.
your digital linking or thinking methods that still
Hmm.
apply to analog. Well,
Hmm.
same thing here. So the timestamp, like you're saying, wasn't a universal thing. It was actually kind of an interpretation that was tacked onto
Exactly.
the system to make it
Hmm.
work initially in the digital age, but
Hmm.
that wasn't part of it. So yeah, really recognizing that stuff is valuable work, and I'm glad you're able to share that with the people in your world, and also with me now, so I have a better sense of it too.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's even yeah. There's it's kind of what always happens. Everyone adds their own abstractions and their own
Yes.
interpretations onto something, and then that's why I went deep down the rabbit hole of writing out Luhmann's cards and his methods by hand to slow my mind down, because Luhmann never put a date on his note cards like once. I've never found one instance of it. And also a lot of the things that we attribute to him saying, the how to take smart notes guy, like the one idea per note, that is also something Luhmann never did or said. There's multiple cards that have multiple running ideas across it,
Oh, that's
essentially.
interesting. Okay.
Oh, I have a whole 70-page document on the myths of Costin. So
uh,
if you're
yeah.
that much of a nerd, you can go deep down that rabbit hole. Yeah.
I have a couple more. I know we're going long, but just real fast. I do
Hey,
want to.
I am fine to go.
Yeah.
As long as you want, so we can, long form works better. People love these types of conversations. So,
Well,
yeah,
one
we can
thing.
go. Yeah.
Okay, just a little bit more. You mentioned, your book. I'd love to get a. You must have that in physical form, right?
Oh, yeah, I just got done with the typesetting of it, my designer. So I'm getting it
Ooh.
physically printed. Right, like, well, in the next few weeks. I've already gotten the quotes and everything. Yeah,
Okay.
and what's interesting is I have a box back there. I can probably, yeah. I'll just get up and show you this real quick. Um, um, in the early days of writing and starting on the book, I said, hey, as an ode to analog, if you want a free copy of the book when I finish, and I started it about a year ago, and I've since finished. I said, if you write to me at my physical office address, and want a copy of the book and request it, I'm going to send it to you free of charge. Which it's turned into a well footnoted, deeply footnoted 594-page beast, right?
Oh
So
my
it's like the
goodness.
cost of printing it is going to be like probably $15, 20. I don't know what it is, but I've got this box full from these
Oh.
people that have written in, sent me a bunch of stuff. There's like probably 40 letters handwritten. Some beautiful stuff in here too. Like this guy's from he wrote from India, or where is this? Actually, no, this is from Thailand. So it's really fascinating to just see people who love expressing and thinking on paper and doing
Hmm.
that. So I wanted to share that is because I owe it to them, and I'm committed to making, focused 100% on the physical version. Is
Yeah.
um, so yeah, but it's funny. It's like it would be so much easier for me to just like it could be live tomorrow if I just uploaded it to the Kindle develop, KDP
Hmm.
platform, Kindle direct publishing platform, post it.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm committed to for the sake of it, getting it in
Yeah.
physical form.
You have
So
to.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Well, count me in, and I don't mind being a natural customer. But yeah, I just want that. I've been collecting. I'm not sure if it's on the screen or not, but tons of books lately. I also have an intention to write a book, and kind of in a similar vein,
Yeah,
to do it
in
using
Obsidian.
my tool, in this case,
Yeah,
Obsidian, and
yeah.
to show and kind of show that process to everyone. Um, yeah, so that's kind of one of those things, and I'm excited for that, and excited for yours too, to learn more about the background and the details and the process. Now,
Yeah,
another point.
yeah.
Oh well,
Oh,
you want to say anything else? Because I had something else I wanted to mention, but it's a different subject. So,
no, yeah. Let's. I was gonna pull out. Well, actually, it's right here. Here's the. Here's this is essentially the book. Um, it was about 6 or 7 months of this. Doing the deep linking each and developing each individual thought, right? And then
mm-hmm.
writing it. I wrote it in about 3 months, 3.5 months. So it's like, maybe 9 months total. And that came out to 190,000 words. So it's like a 600-page tome, and
Yeah,
which is really cool because it's like it sitting down at a blank canvas is like freaking painful. But sitting down and having a conversation with a book and then elaborating on it by writing note cards and name cards, right? You lose track of time. And it's something that Mortimer Adler talks about in How to Write a Book. That book talks about
mm-hmm.
having a conversation with a book. So it was just a wonderful way to write a book, and then you end up with an end product in your first draft. Usually the goal is to get done with a first shitty draft, and this first shitty draft was essentially in there. And then when it got on paper, I was like, wow, it's like, because every single thing, like most of the bits of knowledge were footnoted. It was so rich and deep, and it showed me of how Luhmann's books, by the way, are awful if you read them. They are so pedantic, and that was the style of academic German like writing at the time. It's like the more perplexed you can make the reader, it was like a badge of honor because you made the reader have to look up every other word. And it was like, oh, it was just fascinating. But you can see, but everything was footnoted. So it's like I got to experience how he did that
mm,
real time. Anyway, that's what I was, it's kind of a tangential thing that I
no,
wanted to share. So,
yeah,
yeah.
I'm very interested in that process. It's cool to see that. I'm interested in general in this might take us into something I'm playing with is when I use a new
Hmm.
term, like the idea verse, I'm trying to
Hmm.
then be like, well, what are the properties of
Hmm.
it that would separate it from something else? What are the properties that would make something distinct? And so I just want to put a footnote there because put a pin in that to say that the two special, to quote back to Sancho Panza, it seems to me that joy and having a big effort in mind are really Luhmann's secret sauce.
Yeah.
Joy and having a big effort that fueled
Hmm.
everything.
Hmm. Yeah, he absolutely loved what he did. His vocation was his vacation. I actually
Nice.
went. This is how deep I went. I actually contacted and found Lumen's youngest son is living. He lives in, I believe it's Guatemala, in South America, and he's an artist. And so I reached out to him and conducted. I've had 2 or 3 phone interviews with Clemens Luhmann, Niklas Luhmann's youngest son,
Oh
to
wow.
learn more about how Luhmann worked and what he did. And he was so in love with his craft, and so, like his vocation was his vacation. He would just read, just, nonstop. He loved exploring, tying together different disciplinary fields into creating a theory for how society worked. So Luhmann would read fascinating books that are still around on biology, like this one book called autopoiesis, which is how a cell, and you can see this in biology, a cell essentially reproduces itself and creates an instantiated version, like it clones itself. And he related that to how concepts happen in society, where here's how something, and I haven't refreshed on like
Hmm.
autopoiesis, but how do things in society kind of create an instantiation of themselves and reproduce a version of themselves? So he would take that concept from biology, in doing his readings, and apply it to social theory. In doing this, he would read on the couch well, he had I think chaise or something. It's in French. It's one of those it's like a couch where like half of it has an armrest and the other half doesn't have an
It's
armrest.
like a therapist's
Yeah,
couch.
yeah, essentially. Yeah. He
Okay.
would sit there for hours and hours a day, reading this type of stuff and coming up with these amazing ideas, writing it down on what I call a bib card, which is just essentially a vertical note card with your page number and your brief thought. Then you know, he would also take about 15-minute power naps throughout the day as well. He always had his door slightly cracked open. And so his, you know, two sons or his daughter could come in at any time. And by the way, Luhmann, also his wife sadly passed away when Luhmann was like around 50. So from age like 50 to age, I think he died in his, I don't know, I forgot what age he died at, but like he had a good 30 years where, he essentially would just spend his days reading, thinking. He loved what he did, which is kind of like the higher level principle you're talking about. And he loved developing knowledge. And, so that's one of the most important things and completely overlooked things in this whole thing. It's like he had a 30-year goal. He loved what he did. He never wavered from the goal. And bit by bit, he developed knowledge and created prolific work.
So yeah, this is really profound. I'm happy we're going extra innings here
Yeah.
because because yeah, the joy. But there's something about like it's easy to mistake what's happening here. This is my opinion, and say he had a goal or he had a project, but it's way bigger than that. It was like
Hmm.
this ideal, this giant effort that encompassed anything, unified whatever. Like, and I think I don't know, just an idea here, but if we could all figure out if we wanted to create our own unified blankety blankety blank, I
Hmm.
think then we would find the magic sauce because that resonates with me. I don't know what I'm calling mine, but like
Hmm.
that's a lot of what I'm trying to do. We can, for me, I'll usually put it under the umbrella of sense making, people trying to make sense of the world. That
Hmm.
like this is kind of what it's about, though. It's like having your own sort of a unified theory, not for
Hmm.
publication, but just so things make sense and you can all of a sudden relate something in biology about cellular cloning to something in society at the
Hmm.
human social level. And wow, like
Hmm.
that's what's fueling everything and the joy of that and being in flow the whole time.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah, and one of the properties of that too is, is if it sounds seemingly absurd and like, a little crazy and like you're bashful to share it with the world, then that's a good thing as well. Because, creating like a unified theory of society was a very like kind of in academia, like a crazy undertaking and goal. And that's also I think what inspired him and um, you know, gave him that yeah, it was an aspect of it as well. So
yeah,
yeah.
it's pretty profound stuff. Later, maybe on part two down the road, but
Yeah.
I'd love to kind of figure out properties and conditions of integrated thinking environments, whether analog or digital. We might like a concentrated thinking environment, dedicated, extended thinking environment. But what are some of the properties? A couple ones that I'm playing with are one, you have to have things in there. Like
Hmm.
if it's like so, it sounds so basic, but you need to populate it.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. Have you found that yeah, a lot of people they don't want to populate it because they're trying to like think it through or something. They're trying to
Yes.
like only put the perfect note
Yeah.
in there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you can't have a map of content if you don't have any content.
Hmm.
So like you gotta populate it and not with clipped articles, right? And so
Hmm.
then we talk. So
Yeah.
another property or condition or something has to be own words or
Hmm.
a way that it actually is more than just being able to hit click because
Hmm.
that's nothing.
Yep.
It's one crumb above nothing because
Hmm.
it's still something above nothing, but barely because of
Hmm.
the lack. And so, if populated is one, I think another one would be connected.
Hmm.
I think it so digitally linked. You have
Yeah.
your connected number system.
Yep.
I want to get your thoughts on. Oh no,
That's
you
the
go.
thing
Sorry.
is So what kind of people do, and this kind of, I think I would call these remote links, is if I, okay, so if I have a card, you know, right here, right? This entire thing is linked because they're all
Exactly.
linked.
Yes.
Before I can install any new idea, I have to recursively go back. And I teach people before you even write the main card, I want you to actually go back and get the reverberation and figure out where you're going to install it, so where you're going to link it. So this whole thing is one big chain linked structure, which is kind of how human memory works. But there's also a part in human memory where which Luhmann was very proficient and up to speed on of how like human memory worked. And I don't know if this is why I don't think this is why he designed it this way, but it's kind of a coincidence. In human memory, there's also the concept of remote linking. So if I want to link to this branch in my like, tree of knowledge is like branch, this whole thing is 4214. And then it's like 4214/1/2, right? If I want to link to like, 1331/2, right? That's kind of a remote link. Um, that, but this whole thing, everything in here is one big linked, this whole thing is just linked one after another. Some kind of like, go down these rabbit holes a little bit. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think the that's one thing that is with linking your thinking is that you kind of have, or you're encouraged to link together your ideas, which in pre obsidian, pre linking your thinking, that was like a, maybe like the the feature that was requested, at the very bottom tier of Evernote or something, and some engineer finally added it one day and said, "Here, we can create like URLs for your notes." And it's like, yeah, like, you kind of jerry rigged what I was talking about. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I wanted to say at that point. Also, you touched on, I think, the most important point, which is what I learned from linking your thinking, which is to never copy and paste in your notes. And maybe you don't say it like that, but it was forcing yourself to actually write it in your own words. And I loved your diagram. You still have it. It's like the enjoyment to, the enjoyment to usability, or to creating notes in your own words scale. Like
Yeah.
the more times you used other people's notes, the less you actually enjoyed note taking.
Hmm.
That's something that thankfully is kind of enforced in the
Yes.
analog world,
Uh-huh.
so you
Yeah.
don't have to have self-discipline, which is what I like about to kind of to kind of conform to a lot of the principles that you teach, in analog. It's like, don't copy and paste, where you're like, well, I guess I can't really copy and paste, so I think I'm good on that rule.
Yeah. I love that. Um, so I just want to go through two more, but so we
Yeah,
talked a
let's
little bit
go.
about populated being a property of a healthy integrated thinking environment, extended thinking environment slash ideaverse, whatever we want to
Hmm.
call it right now. Another property that we've been discussing is being connected. I want to stay on connected for just a moment longer to say that um, all of these you can put a little, how well populated is it? How well connected is it? Because I would make the argument, if we're talking on a scale, when you clip something and it goes into Evernote,
Hmm.
there's a form of connection happening. It's extremely weak. It's extremely weak, but there's a kernel of some sort of connection happening. You've at least pulled it out from the entire noise, and you've kind of connected it to an external space. In this case, a computer system. When you open an app, you might be able to find this thing. So you've made the weakest possible connection, but it's still, I think, on the spectrum. It's at the very edge of connection. So I want to
Hmm.
point that out, because then when you write in, let's say, Microsoft Word, and there are sentences next to each other, that's a form of, we're talking about space. So
Hmm.
that's a form of space, proximity.
Exactly.
And that's
Connection.
connections, just like your
Hmm.
index cards. Well, but then your index cards are much further along in the quality of connection
Hmm.
um, in their space. But I just from I want to make the argument there, because then we can look and analyze the health of somebody's system, whatever
Hmm.
it looks like, and we can say, well, how well connected is it? Because if you just clipped a lot of stuff, you have connections, but they're extremely weak.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know. I think that's a
Yeah.
useful diagnostic.
It's kind of like, what we're kind of getting at too is kind of like which human memory, by the way, is still, and Richard Feynman talked about this. It's one of the last greatest mysteries in science. We don't know how human memory works still, and there's a lot of, and I read, and became a big part. I did not expect this to become a big part of my book. I ended up reading a textbook on, very deep research driven one on human memory and how it works, and I kind of related the ideas to this system and PKM and knowledge development and how those systems work, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's that aspect. There's like kind of what we're trying to do is we're trying to kind of create what I call, and what Luhmann called it his second memory, or his, like, I call it, you can call it the extended mind or second mind. We want to kind of create like a the way that our actual human brain kind of works, and it's all about connections in the human brain, and we know that's a key part of it. That's a key part of memory too. And you're right, there's weaker connections, and then there's the stronger connections, and the stronger connections they're driven primarily by activity. Like, how many times do you actively, like, how useful is this area, right? Like, how often are you actually having to generate a principle called reverberation in the mind, and
Mm,
firing off those neurons, firing off those connections.
yeah.
Real quick, and this is something, this is an interesting thing, is you talked about, which is there's two paragraphs, right? That's a connection, right? Um, I contend that, like, Lumen's system, how it really worked, how like the Zettelkasten really worked, is, imagine just one big massive obsidian file, or one big massive Word document, where each paragraph is a bullet point, right? And you can have nested bullet points that go deeper and deeper and deeper. Each bullet point was essentially a card, like an index card, like one of these cards. And each bullet point, though, what made it different is that you can link to, like, imagine if each bullet point had its own like ID or address, where you can say in like I don't know, the 100th bullet point down, you could say, and this relates to, bracket bracket 33, and that links to that, the big up, bullet point up top. Imagine, like, I think how Lumen's system really kind of worked, or is more visualized, is not to think about like Obsidian, or even like the archive, and having all of those different bubbles, those nodes, I would call
Mm-hmm.
them, right, linked to one another. But it was almost as if it was one big document with a bunch of nested bullet points, where you were forced to, before you can install any note, you'd scroll up and find the card that it is, or the idea, or the bullet point of snippet of paragraph of text that it is most similar and closely related to, and then install it right after that. That's kind of like one way of thinking about it, or visualizing it. And yeah, I wanted to, yeah, get that. Maybe
Yeah,
you've thought
totally.
about something like that.
Well,
Get that out there.
absolutely. Yeah, so let's stay on that for a moment, because so Anki wrote, like, memory is
Hmm.
completely different from what you're describing, and what you're
Hmm.
describing, that's why it's so much more valuable, is because, again, we're getting the reps, we're getting behavior
Hmm.
based repetitions. They come very naturally. I'm not sure if you're aware of this from the editing world. I never had to do this, but before it was all digital, editors had very strong arms, because they were cranking physically through film reels. And
Mm.
that means when they're like, oh yeah, there's something on reel 5, let's put that in, and then to get there they have to crank through
Yeah,
all the footage,
interesting. Yeah.
so they see all the footage
So it
subconsciously,
generates
intuitively.
reverberation. Hmm.
Exactly. So I was like, you're gonna love that.
Hmm.
And so it's in the number one editing book ever. It's called In the Blink of an Eye by
Hmm.
Walter Murch.
Hmm.
It's quite a popular one. It's worth a
Yeah.
look at. It's actually in the
Yeah.
appendix section, where he's talking about, I want to
The
say that they're
blink.
chem machines, KEM. I could be off on that. And he was just kind of bemoaning. Actually, he plays it pretty objective, but you could sense that there was a, a an enjoyment of that the digital tool cannot provide.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's thanks for sharing that. And I think that's kind of also how Quentin Tarantino, if I'm not mistaken, um, you know, he talks about that. He was
Oh,
a clerk at a
oh,
movie rental uh, store, and his job was literally to rewind videos all day. That's all he did. And so he would watch videos backwards,
yeah,
which helped him kind of create Pulp Fiction, is because he
yeah,
kind of like those, that's kind of like an asynchronously timed film. But I think that probably helped. Yeah, I think what you're talking about is that rote memorization is called maintenance rehearsal in science of human memory. It's just
okay,
like maintain rehearsing something to maintain it, and it's not, you can kind of force yourself to do it. There's like the Obsidian plugin, like random note or something, or like that where it opens a random note, you know. I've tried doing that and like reviewing flashcards randomly, and I find myself like not to stick to it. After a while, it takes self-discipline, right? Which is
mm-hmm.
not something that you want to have your strategy rely on long term. Um, what I find though is maintenance rehearsal. It is helpful. It's not there's it doesn't offer like it's, but the strongest type of rehearsal is the elaborative rehearsal where you're forced to elaborate on that idea, which is kind of where where the whole linking your thinking, where you're
Cool.
talking about, okay, what does this mean? What does this relate to? And you're elaborating on the idea in your own words and applying it and making it useful. That's how you can really stamp things into your mind. Um, that said, is I think some of the research recently was like, oh yeah, maintenance rehearsal is useless and not effective. And actually, it is. They later found out that it is effective. Um, it's just not as effective as elaborative rehearsal. The benefits is, I think you want a system that maybe focuses 80% on elaborative rehearsal and maybe 20% of the time does maintenance rehearsal, but it does maintenance rehearsal in a fun way where it doesn't make it a pain in the ass to do. You don't want to rely on self discipline.
Mm,
And one of the ways I think maintenance rehearsal is enjoyable, this is what I found, is before I can install any new idea, I have to go back and think of and find where in that box, am I going to install this idea? So I'm essentially doing maintenance rehearsal in a fun way because I'm triggering association, which is actually something that is enjoyable for the human mind for us to try to think and associate,
mm-hmm.
where something is supposed to go. And so you're kind of like as a secondary benefit triggering maintenance rehearsal, which is kind of helping refresh and
Yeah,
refresh human memory. And I think that's kind of like where you talk about like exploring your old notes and going through. That's where I think the node graph view really can be helpful because that's kind of a fun way to do maintenance rehearsal and explore and be like, wait,
yeah, it is.
why are these two notes connected? And then you're kind of
Yeah,
doing maintenance rehearsal.
yeah, and I feel like if maintenance rehearsal is grouping both the rote memory that we would think of as Anki flashcards or something,
Yep.
and what you're describing, I feel like it's cutting short what you're describing in your method with analog because that's so valuable. Like that is crazy valuable to go through uh, getting those repetitions in that way with the context, the associations. That is like improving memory. There'll be research and everything, and I know you've looked at the research, but just to lump it in the same category as the Anki flashcards just doesn't feel like it's doing it justice. Um, I will say the digital equivalent is so with those notes, maps, the home note. The idea is you click on the home note if you want to go top down, and then from that you go into a map. From that map, you're like, I don't know if something about habits. Well, I can go to my habits map of content. It's my go-to example, but then I can
Hmm.
quickly get to something that's called like begets like, and it's this idea that things that are like themselves want to be more like themselves. Maybe it goes back to biology and cloning. Now we're off to the
Hmm.
races, right? But all of
Hmm.
that was from habits map of content, and that got me where I needed to go. So I'm kind of following these trails that get me the reps.
Hmm.
Um, and it's less tangible and physical than what you're describing, but in the same way, um, it's still a very powerful way to get these fun, joyful mental repetitions to kind of remember where things are, make those in the brain. I imagine, this is neuroscientists would be like that's not how it works, but the stronger connections between networks of neurons to remember and recall these things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a good point and reminder of how kind of the maps of content and your home notes is kind of like the process that I go through is whenever I want to install a new card or idea, I go through and think about the term, and hopefully I have it written down in my index. If I don't, then it signals me that it's important enough to like write down in my index. And going through that and kind of like finding where I'm going to install this piece of knowledge is, I think, analogous to you. You know, I'm sure maybe when you're writing a note is like, okay, I'm going to probably install this within, here's where I think it's going to fit in within the home note structure and within the maps, within the various maps of content. Um, yeah, yeah, maps structures, right? Um,
Yeah. Just looking at your cards over there, it's almost like each drawer, it's almost fair to say that each drawer is a kind of a map of content, and then the whole thing is the home in a way. Like that's almost a more
so
accurate
yeah,
analogy.
here's how I was, and I think this is important to explain in case, and I think people, will of the anti-netter community will take the linking your thinking course, and if they do, I think this is a good way to, to that I'd like to share so that here's how I would like think of it as I'm going through linking your thinking. Okay, so the home, I would call the home folder or the home file. I would call it, this is the index, right?
Oh,
This is,
okay.
I actually called this the map at one point because I was inspired by linking your thinking. It's like this is your map to your own tree of knowledge. Okay, the other boxes on there have numbers on them, and I have 5 branches in my tree of knowledge. There's 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, and I've mapped them, which is kind of, everyone can organize their knowledge around the classification scheme that they want, right? I've organized mine kind of around the academic disciplinary fields that essentially that Wikipedia has used because there's so many people contributing to that kind of taxonomy. And this is essentially your home, home file, home folder, your index. This is what Lumen had as well. Um, that will point you to various, essentially, you can think of them various maps of content. Okay, so I'll just show you this. I don't know if you can like see, but um, okay, like here's just a few of my. This is from my A section in my index. This is one on approval. So there is, you'll see like, I haven't touched this in a long time, but like social approval in political system, 1621/51Q. Okay, that's an old card because I don't go that deep on the ABC to Q as much anymore. Okay, um, but you'll see that that's kind of like the home file that'll point you to, okay, I'm gonna think of like approval or social approval and that concept in psychology or something.
Hmm.
And or I can look up Zettelkasten, and that'll point me to the branch 4214. 4214 has since become my whole anti-net Zettelkasten, the history of note boxes and knowledge development, right? So that is Z for Zettelkasten points me to 4214, which essentially has emerged and internally expanded into becoming this big beast.
Mm-hmm.
Well, at the front of this big beast, like early on when I was developing it, I would create my own kind of, this is like my own maps of content for each specific aspect subsection within Zettelkasten that
Mm-hmm.
would emerge organically over time. So these are kind of like, for instance, biggest obstacles slash challenges in building, a, a second mind or an anti-net was like 3DA/BE1, right? And then,
Mm-hmm.
you know, biggest potential or opportunities, handwriting and memory and the benefits, example of Lumen's cards, the rough
Mm.
structure of this system. So, you know how you teach fluid structure versus rigid structure. Um, the scholar Johannes Schmidt, when he analyzed how Lumen's notebox worked, he called it a rough structure, kind of like a tree. Think of a tree; it's kind of anti-fragile. It's not like a building. A building I would call like a big, concrete building I would call a rigid structure.
Mm-hmm.
A, fluid structure I would call like maybe like water or something, right? It's
Yeah.
like fluid and, can kind of adapt or like lilies in a pond essentially is a fluid structure where each individual note is a lily in the pond. It's very fluid how everything connects. And this whole system is a rough structure. Okay. Anyway, where I'm going with this is kind of like, my maps of content to this area, this branch of my knowledge. And then later on, I organized my book by then looking at that whole emergent way of thinking and said, okay, here's my chapter on Lumen, and then here's like the subcomponents, and that's like kind of my maps of content related to
Okay.
that. Yeah. So you can see just the concepts and the links. So for people that are the analog folks that want to take thinking your thinking, and it's like, yeah, you essentially you create your maps of content on individual note cards, and just create links to the numeric alpha card addresses, and you can kind of you can ascribe to the teachings that you very clearly introduce and have introduced to the world.
Well, yeah, thanks. I mean, this is just, I mean, look at us. We thought we were going only 60 minutes and we've over
Yeah.
doubled that. And just because we've been enjoying it. So thanks for getting me on here, Scott. It's just been amazing. And I hope we can do another one down the road because there are a couple other ideas, but we'll get to those another
Yeah,
time, I'm
for
sure.
for sake of time, let's I think we'll end now. And yeah, I've enjoyed this. I thought we were gonna, go maybe a little bit over an hour, but then we kind of like, we started talking about this whole space, and it's been just time has flown. I love it. Um, so yeah, when's the last day? When is the enrollment? And when
So,
is the last day that for this next cohort
yeah.
nine?
Well, this one's today's a Sunday. Depends, when this goes live. But the last day is Wednesday. So essentially, from
Okay,
right now of this recording, they're 3 days to sign up.
cool,
Yeah.
awesome, awesome. Well, yeah, we'll get this live and shipped out today so that people
Oh
can,
wow.
dive deep and uh, and start exploring this. Hopefully, they explore it and they review it by Wednesday. And I'll tweet this out as well to get it out to my people to check this out. I think people are going to absolutely love this. So, thank you for your time, Nick. I know it's crunch time for you, and I wish you all the luck in this upcoming cohort, and anything I can do to help. Like I said, we anti-netters and the analog folk will be like the Irish in Braveheart, so we'll be there to have your flank, my friend. And yeah. So thank you so much for this, and yeah, anything else to add? Feel free to add it.
No, just a real pleasure, Scott. So thanks for putting this together. I mean, I've really enjoyed it. So if anyone's listening through all this, then obviously you must have enjoyed this too, and happy that we're able to have something that's hopefully helpful for the personal knowledge management space moving forward.
Yeah, awesome. All right, Nick. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you. All right, see ya.